Did you know that many of the materials you see in high-quality renders don't use real textures? Everything is done with nodes, and today we're going to learn how to do it. We are going to see what procedural textures are, how we can use nodes to blend textures, how to create a professional lighting in seconds, and finally, the main features of the Principled BSDF node, the backbone of all the materials. And at the end, I will leave you with a free scene you can download to practice everything you have learned. Two important points to keep in mind. First, we will be doing all of this using Cycles, which is Blender's most powerful render engine. So make sure you select it here in the render settings, and also make sure to use the GPU in the preferences, and here as well. And the second thing, it is important to enable the Node Wrangler add-on in the preferences. This will help to make node connections much more fluid. Now let's open the shader editor, or just switch to the shading workspace, and we are ready to go. Well, let's start by looking at how to use the procedural textures.
We can find the textures here in the texture menu if we press Shift-A. These are all the ones we have available. Let's see the ones I consider the most important ones, which are the ones we have on screen. First, let's start with noise. As you can see, this node is creating a texture, which is like a kind of irregular spots. And here we have the characteristics of this material. First, we have the scale to change the size. We have this slider to add or reduce the detail. It's a bit more noticeable in the gradations. We have the roughness, which is to make it a bit more contrasted. We have lockinarity, which is a second layer of noise on top of the first, and we have the distortion, which twists our image. So, based on our needs, we can start adjusting these sliders. And we also have other types of noise: multifractal, ridged multifractal, hybrid multifractal, and heteroterrain. That each one has its own characteristics, which we can use for different situations. So this is our first texture. And this noise helps us create all kinds of irregularities on the surface. The second one we have is Voronoi. Voronoi is a texture that creates us like cells. It creates us like cells separated by a thin layer. This is a very common pattern in nature, and that can be used on many organic surfaces. Likewise, we have several types of Voronoi, each one with its specific characteristics. This one, for example, looks like stones. And each one, likewise, also has the scale. It has the level of detail if we want to add a bit more noise. Roughness, liquidity, and randomness. This one, for example, already does it quite evenly. So, as I was saying, it's a texture that can help us create the details of organic surfaces: leather, animal skin, plant fibers, etc. The next one we have is the wave texture. What is a line pattern that also has its characteristics here? First, we have bands or rings, that it is done radially. We can also align it with the different axes, or do it diagonally. And we have this third characteristic for the detail of these strokes. With this, we only do it in one direction. This one does it in two directions, like a kind of angle. And this one does it much more smoothly. Also, like everyone else, we have scale and distortion. This, for example, helps us create wood. We have details, among others. So, this is our third texture. And finally, among the important textures, we have the gradient. That is simply a transition between black and white. We have another type of algorithms that they can make it a little more or less contrasted. We can do it diagonally, circularly, quadratically, or radially. This one is really barely noticeable. Start at this little tip. Well, then, those would be our four main textures. That I consider to be the most used for creating all kinds of materials in Blender. Here, we have some additional textures, which are for somewhat more specific tastes, and they are down here. We can also find these here in this texture menu.
We will now look at some of the most important nodes to blend and control textures.
So let's start with the color ramp. Here we have our nodes connected to a gradient texture. And to create the color ramp, I'm going to press Shift-A Converter, and here we have it in third place. I select it and position it on top of this cable. Here, apparently, nothing has happened. What the color ramp does is replace the tones of a grayscale with other colors. In this case, we are replacing black with black and white with white, so that's why nothing stands out, but I can select this black and reposition it. So this way I am controlling that scale of grays and replacing it with these new colors. This way I can control them. Here we have several algorithms. The one that comes by default is linear. We have ease, which is a bit more contrasted. We have cardinal, which is an intermediate point. B-spline, which is the smoothest of all. And we have come stamped, which creates a completely hard edge. As you can see here, we no longer have gradations, but a completely contrasted edge. I'm going to put it back in linear, and we can replace this grayscale not only with other grays, but also with colors. Selecting this bar, I can choose colors to assign to that grayscale. From this plus button, I can also add other colors. I'm going to create another one around here, and if I want to delete it, I click here on the minus button. So it is an extremely practical way to control the position of the colors. I can also mix this ramp color with another. For example, here I have too much red, so I can create another color ramp and move it here to control the new position. I'm going to put here, for example, constamp, and manipulate the distance between these colors. Let's see how this can work with other textures. I'm going to connect this Voronoi in this case. And we're going to play a little with the position of the colors. And look at the kind of interesting things we can achieve. Here we are replacing the grayscale of black and white of this Voronoi with these colors. I will press Ctrl-Shift-Click on the texture to view it. And then Ctrl-Shift-Click on the color ramp, so you can see the colors I'm replacing it with. Let's try with other options. That also gives us very interesting results. So, well, that is our first mix node to help us control the textures. Let's go with the second one. The second is the color mix node. Here, I have a red RGB node and another yellow. So, if I want to mix them, I can look here. In the color menu, Mix Color, and we put it over here. After that, I can connect these two colors, and then I press Ctrl-Shift-Click on top of this node, and this would be the resulting mixture. I can do it this way, or by simply selecting both and pressing Ctrl-0. If I press Ctrl-0 with both nodes selected, it creates this mix node. In this mix node, we have this little bar, which is the factor that determines the influence of each of the colors. If I move it to the left, I increase the influence of the color above, which is red. If I move it to the right, the influence of the yellow increases. This part is quite easy to understand. Now I can also replace this factor with a mask. So I have here, for example, this wave texture, and I can connect it to the blink mask where it says factor. And if I visualize it, we are using it to make the color black be replaced by red, and the white color is replaced with yellow. If I modify this texture here, the resulting colors of the mixture will be modified in the same way. I'm going to disconnect all of this. And something interesting we can do here, it's about mixing textures using blending modes. The blending modes can be found here. If you have knowledge of Photoshop or any image editing software, maybe you are familiar with them. So let's look at an example of these blending modes. I'm going to put this texture at the bottom. I'm going to set the factor to 0.5 in the middle, and I'm going to connect the Voronoi texture at the bottom. So they are partially mixing there. But I can change the fusion mode. So instead of mix, I can put, for example, multiply. And I increase the factor to the maximum, and what I'm doing is adding the black values of both textures. And this is what we get as a result. I can, for example, use the Add mode. And here we are adding the whites of both textures. So this is quite useful, for example, if we want to create specific masks. Well, that was the blend node. Now let's move on to the last one, which is the coordinates. Here, we have a gradient node in this material. And as you can see, all the nodes here have a little blue dot that says vector. And we can use this vector to control the position of this node. For example, I can select this Voronoi and use it as a vector, and look at the result it gives me. So we can use this to control the position and details of a texture. But here what I specifically want to show you is the coordinate node. To get the coordinate node, I select the texture and press Ctrl-T. When I press Ctrl-T, these other two nodes appear. The first is the coordinate node and the other is the mapping node. So here we have the different texture transformations: position, rotation, and scale. If I have this texture then, and I move its position on the x-axis, it's going to change our location on that axis. If I do it in y, nothing changes. And likewise if I do it in z, because the influence of this gradient is only on the x-axis. I can also alter the rotation on some axis, for example, here on the y side. The rotation is already working for us, as you can see here. Likewise on the z-axis. Or equally the scale. We can reduce or increase the size of the texture if we want to alter the contrast. I'm going to connect it now to this Voronoi node. And I wanted to show you that we can, for example, alter one of the scales to generate a different texture. Here, for example, I am increasing the scale on the x-axis, and it's generating this kind of lines. For example, we could use this if we wanted to make a wooden object with the grain clearly visible. And in the texture coordinates, we also have other options to map it through the normals, through the UV texture, in case we have one, object coordinates, camera coordinates. And there, as you can see, it adapts to the position of the 3D camera. The coordinates of the window, so here if we move the object, look, the texture always stays static. And the reflective one, which I really don't know how to use very well. So this would be our third node, and with this, we already have a gigantic range of options to create a wide variety of procedural textures.
The next thing we have to do to visualize our materials correctly is to create a consistent lighting. And for that, we will set up our scene with an HDRI lighting, which means high dynamic range. And this allows the materials to interact with the light in a much more natural and consistent way. So, once again, let's go back to Blender.
And I'm going to come here to the World menu where we have our background. By default, we have this background, which is a flat gray lighting. And this is where we are going to connect to the HDRI image. For that, I'm going to come to this page called Polyhaven, where we can find completely free HDRI images. It's a very large database that offers us many free resources. So the idea is to find an image that you like, and that has balanced lighting. That is, the light should neither be too intense nor too dark, and that the color temperature is also neutral, neither too warm nor too cold. What seems most advisable to me for that is to look for it here in this Indoor tab. Here, we are going to look for an image that we like, and that it has that balanced lighting I mentioned. For example, this image here wouldn't work for us because it is an image that has a very warm light, so that would slightly hinder our ability to interpret the materials. Instead, we could use an image like this, for example. Look, it's quite a neutral light, and that it has multiple sources of lighting, so it seems like a very good option to me. I'm going to open it, make sure it's in HDR, and download it. I'm now here in Blender. To connect that image, I'm going to select the background. I press Ctrl-T, and that connects it to some coordinates and this image. From here, I'm going to look for the HDR environment that I just downloaded. I'm going to open it, and as you can see, it's already connecting to the image, and it's already lighting up. We are going to place the render in this area, and that's what we have. To be able to visualize it in the background, it must be in perspective mode. If it's in orthographic mode, it won't be visible. Well, then we already have that lighting. And if you want it to be a little faster, I recommend that you disable the denoise. This way, it will be much more agile, and we reactivate it when we want to see the detail clearly. Well, we already have this lighting, but I don't want the background to show up. For that, what I'm going to do is select the background, duplicate it. I select both, and press Ctrl-0 to merge the nodes. Remember that all these shortcuts are provided to us by the Node Grangler add-on, and for the factor, we are going to create a node that is here in input called LikePad. And we are going to connect camera ray. So what we are doing is having the lighting affect the object with one of the backgrounds, but that the other background is seen on the camera. In this case, it's reversed. I'm going to select this mix shader and press Alt-S. And so I invert the nodes, and now I have my scene lit. And the background is also completely gray. Here, I like to disable the floor. And I'm going to come back here to Object. And with this, we are now ready to start exploring the materials.
Now, let's explore the parameters we have in the Principled BSDF node.
And for that, we are also going to help us with this texture, which is a noise with a little contrast to help us visualize the changes in the values. So I want to reactivate this background here so that the whole scene can be seen, because as we will also see some transparency options, that will help us. I'm going back to the objects and we're going to start. The first parameter we have is the base color. That is as simple as the color we have on the surface. We've seen it quite a few times already. In this input, I can also connect a color texture. I'm going to connect this and it reflects on the surface of my model. That concept is extremely easy to understand. The next thing we have is the metallic. If I increase it, our material gains a much more metallic reflection. And I can also control it with this texture. So if I connect it here, what I'm going to do is the white parts of the texture becomes metallic, and the black parts remain non-metallic. So with this, I can control the intensity of the metallicity. Well, the next parameter we have is the roughness. I'm going to make this a little darker so we can identify it better. And the roughness, as we have seen before, is used to control the roughness of the surface reflections. If I remove it completely, the material becomes completely reflective. And if I connect a mask to it, what I'm doing is making the white tones rougher. And the black parts reflective, as you can see here. I'm going to make it a little darker so that it's more obvious. And there you can see that the black areas are the ones that become reflective here in this model. The next parameter we have is the IOR, or index of reflection, which indicates how much light is my model going to reflect. I recommend that you leave it at the default and increase it only when you want to make an exaggerated reflection. If you want to change the perception of the reflections, we can play with this value. The next parameter we have is alpha, which is simply the transparency. If I reduce it, I will make this material transparent. As you can see there, I'm going to release this mask, and if I connect it here in alpha, the white parts are going to be transparent, and the black parts will remain visible. I can exaggerate this a little bit if I want, and there you can see the effect of this mask. Let's move on to the next parameter. I'm going to put an intermediate roughness back here and make it a little clearer. So, the normal helps us indicate the angle of the surface. With that, we can then simulate relief. I can then use a texture to modify the way light is reflected. I'm going to create a node for that called bump. I'm going to connect this texture to the height and visualize it. So there, as you can see, we are generating relief on the surface. Based on this texture, what is white will lift, and what is black will sink to the surface. If I connect it here to the normal of my principled node, this would be the result. In this case, it is extremely intense, so I'm going to reduce it so it can be perceived better. Likewise, the distance. I can adjust it a little more, and that way we achieve this kind of effects. as if we had a relief on the surface. I'm going to disconnect this normal, and now let's move on to the next parameter, which is subsurface. This parameter allows light to penetrate in the object and come out again with a different color. For example, it is what happens with human skin and many organic beings. So if I increase the weight, a material is going to allow the light to pass through it. This can be perceived better if we are backlit. I'm going to make the tone a little lighter, and here you can notice a bit of color. To make it more visible, I will increase the scale. I'm going to give it a much higher scale, 0.5. Ready. And there, as you can see, the object is already turning quite pink. It's as if the inside of the object were pink, and the light passed through it. This is configured by default for human skin. But from here, we can play with the colors. These are the colors red, green, and blue, respectively. So it's an effect that can mainly serve us for organic creatures. The next parameter we have is specular, so we can control the reflections a little bit more. I'm going to reduce the roughness, and with this we can make a little more intense reflections, and we can give it a color. The illuminations then, instead of being white, now turn reddish. As you can see here, I'm going to exaggerate it a little more by giving it a higher value. And that's it. There, as you can see, it helps us manipulate the reflections of the material. We continue with transmission. Transmission is simply the capacity of the object to allow light to pass through it. If I increase it, our object becomes transparent, like a crystal. If I increase the roughness, it looks like a crystal that has been sanded, and if I take it away completely, looks like a completely polished crystal sphere. Basically, it is for creating objects like glass, gems, or materials that have transparency. I'm going to take away the influence. I'm going to do this again a little darker. I'm going to increase the roughness, and we'll see code. If I increase this value, you can see that it is as if we were once again removing roughness from our model, and this is simply a second layer of reflection. It's like we put a shiny lacquer on top, because I can have a name reflection here, which can even be completely rough. But with this other layer, we control a second level of reflection. It is useful, for example, for the paint surface of a car or similar objects. We have this other parameter called sheen. If I increase it, you can see that a kind of border is generated around it. I'm going to make that completely clear. And what we are doing here is like bending the light based on the angle at which we are looking. Something similar to what happens with velvet. We are redirecting some reflections. And from this parameter, I can also control the tone of this effect. And with this, we can achieve some quite interesting material effects. Well, over here we have emission, which is simply to make our object emit light. We can control the strength and control the color as well. I'm going to reset it to 0 again. And finally, we have this other parameter, which is thin film. To be honest, it's quite irrelevant, so we won't even see it. So, well friends, with this, we have seen all the parameters we have in our Principled BSDF node. And with this, we then have a great variety of tools to create different materials.
And with that, my friends, we come to the end of this tutorial. I hope you learned a lot and that now you feel more confident using the shaderator to create your own materials in Blender. As I mentioned earlier, you will find a free sushi scene in the description so you can practice everything you learned today. If you like this video and you want to take your skills to the next level, I have a complete modeling and texturing course for beginners. You can also find the link in the description. Thank you for joining me until the end. I will be uploading much more Blender content, and if you want to go deeper into texturing, I will leave you here these other two videos that I'm sure you will like.